Good afternoon and happy Monday, everybody. Sorry I didn't get to do this yesterday. I was in Oklahoma with my family, and there wasn't much signal down there, so I didn't want to risk trying to do a live video and keep getting disconnected. So here we are. As you guys know, because if you're here, then you're obviously on my page. I'm Sam Reichard. We will get into the live reading and then talk about a few additional things at the end of it. So, we got Order of the Trident, Speculum, Chapter 11, The Hawk and the Worm. Bits of dust lingered in the air from the neglected council room, displayed only by the beaming sunlight through the stone-trimmed windows. The trident engraved in layers on the thick wooden table. Resting at the center of the room was partially obstructed by the dirty, unopened satchel. Rubbing his hands over the short stubble of his freshly shaven head, Gareth paused, adjusting the strap holding his eye patch in place. He hadn't grown accustomed to the feel of it yet, but it made him a bit more sightly. Leaning back in his form-fitted chair, he listened to the wood creak beneath his weight. Growing impatient, he slammed his front legs back to the wooden floor. A loud crack echoed out, grabbing the attention of the others in the room. "How long are we going to wait?" Ready to fight, Ravion snapped around, finding the source of the commotion. Relieved it was nothing more serious, he lowered his guard. "Just a while longer. He said he would be here." Continuing his ritual, Ravion paced back and forth, allowing his usual calm demeanor to dissolve with each step. The chamber door creaked open, revealing the black-cloaked figure in the shadows of the upper keep figure in the shadows of the upper keep's level. Upper fucking weird word combination there will be fixed. He stepped into the room, unnaturally finding every available shadow to cloak his face. Ravion froze, watching the figure enter the room. Ready to spring into action, he held fast, hoping it wouldn't come to that. Glaring his discontent, he spoke. "Thank you for answering my missive. Would you care to explain why you broke into the vaults?" Unsure if he was making the right decision, he slowly approached, leaning against the back of his own chair. A sadistic yet calm voice echoed from the shadow. "Let's not play coy. You know why I have come." Drawing his sword, he smiled, watching the others tense at the sight of steel. Without a word, he laid it to rest on the weapon rack. Quickly laying the remainder of his weapons, he lowered his hood, revealing his face to the men, and tossing his cloak over the stand. Approaching one of the 5 chairs, he took a seat. Ravion kept his eyes locked on the familiar face. It didn't disarm him in the slightest. "I know exactly why you're here, but you didn't answer my question, Cain." Leviathan kicked his feet up, letting them rest on the well-made table. Bits of dirt and mud fell from the soles of his leather boots, littering the surface. "I don't go by that name. It's Leviathan." Gareth lunged forward, unable to control himself. Getting a better look at the Dark Warrior, he let his words fly. "I don't give a damn if you're going by Rimley de Leon now. He asked you why you broke into the vaults. You could have just as easily gained access without attacking the city with a unit of Drew." The name of the vile race left a distasteful film in his mouth. Spitting it to the floor, Gareth glared at the man, awaiting an answer. Leviathan smiled at the impatient bald man, daring him to act. Seeing it wasn't going to happen, he shifted his gaze back to Ravion. "I don't answer to either of you. But if it will set your mind at ease, everything I've done has been to further the goals of this order. I couldn't simply walk in and take what I needed as Cain. Too many questions would have been raised. I needed the Drew to die at the right time. So I let them fight their way into a place they'd be unable to escape and otherwise unable to reach without the proper guidance." Ravion walked around his chair and took his seat. Choosing his words carefully, he locked his gaze on the man. "Your actions, however beneficial they may have been, have shaken our trust. There are matters we must discuss as an order. We have to know you're in this just as much as we are. Between Malachi's death and Crennan's disappearance, it's just the 3 of us. This whole thing falls apart if we don't trust each other. I'm not here for your trust. I'm here because you asked me for my help, If I wanted trust, I'd get a dog. At least I wouldn't have to explain my actions to it at the end of the day. Kicking his boots from the table, Leviathan leaned forward and started to rise. I'm sorry you feel that way. Ravion nodded. The hidden doorway along the side wall flew open, revealing the half-orc. Rushing forward, Krenin threw his arms around the heavy wooden chair and the Dark Warrior's chest. Pulling him back into the seat, he pinned his arms to his sides. Struggling to keep the subdued man in his seat, Krenin flexed his muscles, squeezing as tight as he could. Hold still! This be over in a minute! Rising from their seats, Gareth and Ravion approached the occupied chair, taking position on either side. Ravion reached into Malachi's vacant chair and grabbed a handful of leather straps. Handing a few of them to Gareth, he went to work securing the man to the seat. Gareth threw the strap around the man's chest, careful to leave room for the half-orc to release him. Pulling them as tightly as he could, he locked the buckles and tugged, making sure they didn't have any slack. Krenin slowly released the man, ready to grab him if the straps didn't hold. Backing away, he took position behind the chair, ready to do what he was asked. Flexing his muscles, Leviathan struggled against the belts, hoping he could bulk up enough to leave enough slack to slip out. Waiting for them to back away, he released his hold and tried to move, to no avail. Held tight, he sighed deeply and glanced at his captors. Really, guys? You believe this is necessary? Though I must commend you on hiding the pigger. I legitimately didn't know he was there. Krenin bulked up at the slur, but held back. Spending too much time around the humans, he'd grown somewhat accustomed to their racism, though it still stung, more so coming from a friend. Pulling against the bracer on the man's arm, Ravion grabbed the thin straps and released them, letting the leather covering fall to the floor. Unfortunately, we do. Did you really think we didn't know who you were? A mysterious masked man that only shows up when Kane is away? Never mind the glow, or the fact that you have the same build. Let's not even mention the accusations your little schemes have risen. We let you play your little charade, but that's gone on far too long. Digging around the loose-fitted sleeve of the black tunic, Ravion uncovered the peach flesh beneath, spotting his query. Releasing the shirt, he took a step back, his fears confirmed. Damn it, Kane. Leaning over the backrest to get a better look, Gareth studied the deep skull-shaped scar. Several blackened veins retreated from the mark, disappearing beneath the flesh. Is it as bad as we feared? Glancing over at the bald man, Krenin looked upon the mark, recalling the books that Ravion had tasked him with guarding. The pages rushed through his mind, parrying their conversation they had had hours earlier. Remembering the marks sprawled out in the ancient text, he lumbered to his reinforced chair and took a seat. A confused expression on his face, he tried to piece together the information, clearly missing something. What's it mean? It's one of the strongest binding spells I've been able to find. Sadly, most of the books on this sort of thing were in the tower's library. We got lucky with the information we were able to find here. It seems this Leviathan figure, best as I've been able to translate, has locked himself into Kane's body. From what I learned from Kane, and judging by the shape of the mark, I'd say we're dealing with a dragon of some kind. How do we free him? Gareth probed the scar, watching the veins react to his touch. Leviathan smirked, watching the younger scout turn lord. You know, you're a lot smarter than you look, though I'm afraid you can't just remove it. It takes something that can cut through magic to fully break the binding spell. I'm afraid the only thing you had that can do that... I'm afraid the only things you had that can do that were in the vault. Had, as in no longer in your possession. Chuckling at his own joke, he continued, But even if you managed to obtain one, it doesn't mean I'd be gone, just that I would be able to leave. I'm afraid there's not much you can do about that. His amused expression shifted, settling to a stern gaze. And just so we're clear, if you try, I'll have no problem biting his tongue off. As if the threat had served its purpose, his usual demeanor returned. I'm afraid the only way to get rid of me is for him to do it himself. It's not all bad, though. Despite what you may think, I have my uses. Hell, give it some time. You may prefer my methods over his. At least I won't nag you about what's morally right every time a questionable problem desires a questionable solution. Gareth's gaze shifted from the possessed man to Ravion. You know, he kinda has a point. Unable to believe what he was hearing, Ravion scoffed, rising from his seat. Walking toward the prisoner, he pressed his backside against the heavy table and folded his arms, wrapping his fingers around the kriss, silencing its cries. We can't just leave him trapped in there. He's one of us. I'm not saying leave him in there. I'm just saying we use this thing for a while. Let it sort itself out. That is, after all, how it's apparently going to have to play out anyway. If he had to find his own way out, who are we to... If he has to find his own way out, who are we to interfere? I'd say we call for a vote. All in favor of using this thing's knowledge to better the order? Gareth raised his hand, looking to his brothers. Crinan glanced from one to the other, unsure who to side with. Makes sense to me. He slowly raised his hand, hoping he was making the right decision. I'd raise mine, but I'm afraid you've strapped it down. But I feel my vote should still count. I am, after all, still a member of this council. Ravion shook his head. I can't believe we're considering this. Looking at the possessed form of his friend, he stared deep into his eyes, promising more with his gaze than his words could ever achieve. You're going to do everything we tell you. If you hesitate or question anything, I'll lock you in the vaults myself until you die of old age. Which, if you are what we believe, I'd imagine that would be a very long time. Oh, thieves' honor! Leviathan wiggled against his bindings, mocking a salute in his immobile state. Sighing heavily, Ravion raised his hand. Vote carries. Crinan, unbind him. The half-orc stood and approached the occupied chair, digging his meaty fingers behind the buckle of the man's midsection. He reached back, feeling the textured grip of the black and purple dagger in the palm of his hand. In a single fluid motion, he sliced into the man's arm, watching the neatly filleted flesh peel away. Crinan pulled hard, yanking both the man and chair toward him. The meat and skin shriveled around the mark like a branding on cattle's hide. The charred, dark gray mass fell free and landed on the chamber floor, breaking apart into dust. You double-crossing... Using the momentum, Crinan punched as hard as he could, sending the chair toppling in the other direction. It crashed to the floor, the secure straps holding its occupant in place. Call me Pigger again. Leviathan felt the bony knuckles smash into his face, launching him backward. It was all pretty clear what had happened. What confused him was the lack of a crash. He should have hit the ground by now. Looking around, he noticed he was standing. No straps, no chair. Just himself in a room of darkness as far as the eye could see. Realization hit him. He knew exactly where he was. Smiling, he looked around in all directions. You should have stayed gone. I was having fun. He danced around, trying to find where the noble warrior was hiding. How anyone could navigate this darkness was beyond him. Warrior, come out and play. That was a pun, by the way. With the Warriors, cult classic movie, if you didn't know. The whole, Warriors, come out and play. I had to put that in there. It was perfect. Anyway. A fractured blue light appeared in the distance, growing closer. He could see the brilliant breastplate and sheathed greatsword protruding over the man's shoulder. He looked as righteous as ever. It made him sick. He sighed. I suppose this day would have come sooner or later. I guess we may as well get this over with. Kane glared his dislike at the conniving doppelganger. He stood for everything that was wrong in the world and used him to do it. He was going to pay for his crimes. He had to pay. It took me some time to find my way in this place, though it seems it's paid off. What are you? Leviathan laughed. That's a simple question, one I'm sure you already know the answer to. I'm part of you, or more accurately, you're part of me. I'm ambitious, you're stagnant. I get things done, you stand idle, waiting for a sign. It's all rather tedious, if you ask me. You're trying to trick me. I would never murder or betray my friends. You're You're a poison, siphoning the life out of me, destroying everything I've created. While it's true I enjoy toppling your little constructs, I assure you this is no trick. I could have killed you many times over, but honestly it was all too much fun watching you build your little empire only to take it from you. The trouble is, we're two sides of the same coin, you and I. Without me, you're nothing. Cain looked around, admitting the truth to himself. Unfortunately, the inverse holds true as well. Only one of us can control the body. I thought I'd finally managed to get rid of you during the war. Though I must admit I hadn't counted on you fighting so hard to get back. You're stronger than I originally thought. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm stronger. Leviathan paused, letting his sadistic smile return. Looking into the eyes of his noble counterpart, he continued, "Oh, I'm sorry. Did you think... I'm sorry. Did you think you were responsible for anything you've done? That's cute. Everything you are, everything you have is because of me. Your enemies, your friends, your position. I'm the driving force behind you. I'm the whisper in your ear telling you to seize opportunity, telling you to attack your foes without hesitation. If I hadn't shown you the way, you'd be a lost child wandering the wilderness. Who do you think guided you to this land? It was all because of me." Cain felt his emotions swelling inside him. He had to act quickly. If they got the better of him, if he allowed them to cloud his mind, he'd make a mistake. He couldn't have that. If he showed the slightest weakness, this demon could gain the upper hand. And that wouldn't bode well for anyone. I'm done with your games. If you're truly a piece of me, then prove it. Kill me and claim my body as your own if you can. That's the only way you'll ever keep me from rising up. Oh, if it were so simple. I can't just kill you outright. I wouldn't be able to have any more fun. It'd force me to join with you, unable to escape your constant nagging inside my head for the rest of our time, and I can't have that. Leviathan casually circled the armored man, watching him, taunting him. No, I seek a more permanent solution. I'm going to break you. I'm going to cut you down at the knees and make you lick my boots clean. By the time I'm done, you'll beg me for mercy that will never come. Then you're going to lie in wait at my feet like a submissive dog, hoping one day I'll reach down and pet you. The longing will drive you mad. You'll become a shell of your former self. You'll be a withered and shrunken husk of a man long forgotten, left to writhe away into the unrecognizing lump of the shadowed floor. I'm sure a time will come, long after this world has abandoned your memory, a time when the seven lands have learned to fear my name, that I'll consider letting you see the fruits of my labor. I'll contemplate allowing you to set your eyes on the darkness of a world long past your touch. And on that final day, the day you draw your final breath, I'll remember the promise I made you this day, and I'll deny you that last question, letting you die without ever knowing what happened to the world you spent so much effort fighting for. Cain watched him encircle like a shark, ready to devour its prey. Rebellion grew inside him like a wellspring of light. He smiled. You'd better strike fast and hard then, for I'll not go down without a fight. Ah, there's that rebellious spirit I've come to admire. The very reason I took an interest in you in the first place. Ready to end the taunts, Cain thought about the sword strapped to his back. He was too fast. He wouldn't be able to reach it in time. He would have to improvise. A plan in mind, Cain lunged at the encompassing man, drawing his dagger and plunging it into the chainmail rings covering his chest. The blade sank to the hilt, stopped only by the silver crossguard. Glancing down, a bellowing laugh escaped the dark warrior. Calming himself, he stared his victory into the helpless man, watching the defeat work its way into him. Did you really think I could be killed with such a puny weapon? Wrapping his gloved hand around the black and silver band dagger, he plucked it from his stomach. Glancing over the sharpened edge, clean of any blood, he dropped it, letting it disappear into the shadowed floor beneath him. Inspecting the stretched rings where the blade had entered, he let out an exaggerated sigh. Shaking his head, he waved his hand over the tear. The broken rings reformed, weaving themselves together. In a matter of seconds, the torn armor had completely mended itself, removing any sign of the broken links. I'm afraid you won't be able to get rid of me so easily. I still intend to show you what I've got in store for your friends. Reaching forward quicker than Cain could react, Leviathan pressed his finger into the man's head, letting the magics flow through him. Cain tried to evade, tried to flee, but it was no use. The man was too fast. He felt a pressure build in his head, throbbing against his skull, begging to be released. Dropping to his knees, he grabbed his head, watching, helpless to the flood of visions racing through his mind. He watched his body enter the tower, the brilliant armor reflecting the beaming rays of sunlight. He felt the darkness flow from him, tainting the red bricks, coercing it to store his corruption. The scene shifted, revealing a village. He felt the necks of children snap beneath his grip. Their pure blood spilled on the ground, coating his boots. He looked into their parents' eyes, watching their hatred form at his sight. He felt the pleasure of their deaths, burning them alive, trapped, unable to cry out. The scene shifted again, forcing him to watch murder after murder, each one growing more daring than the last. As if he wanted to be caught, a lingering pain grew inside him. He knew that his face was their final vision. All those people believed him a monster, people that trusted him, people that depended on him for protection. He saw the pain in their eyes, a pain worse than any he'd felt before. How could he save them? How could he prevent others from suffering a similar fate? Everyone he'd known was helpless to the dark radiation seeping from him, slowly corrupting them. He watched the power flow into a green gem stolen from Shadgull. Its taint slowly flowed indifferently upon his throne. The crown taken from the man himself laid hidden in the cellars of Shadgull City's fortress, waiting for a time when it would be found and placed atop the next lord, ready to corrupt him. Every scene played out, revealing a small seed of darkness, ready to sprout up and pollinate the world. Even Mortimus, his mentor so long ago, had inadvertently been killed by the shadowed form of himself. No! His vision returned, looking upon the creature that had stolen his face. Anger, regret, despair flowed through him, a mix of emotions swirling about, testing his sanity. Am I responsible for all of this? Leviathan didn't give him time to fully process everything. Continuing on, he leaned in, nearly whispering to the defeated man. Once I've reclaimed your body, the first thing I'm going to do is slice Ravion's throat from ear to ear. He was a useful tool, but I have no need of him any longer. Gareth, on the other hand, he's an excellent puppet. All I have to do is suggest the Jurafar are involved, and he'll fall into line. He couldn't take any more. He had to put a stop to it. Drawing his short sword, he stood, raising the blade. You underestimate me. Leviathan laughed. I've already proven your weapons are useless against me. What do you hope to gain? He slid the blade under the leather strap along the side of his armor. Slowly dragging the keen edge it cut through, the great sword fell free, disappearing into the darkness without a sound. He pulled the breastplate free, letting it fall from him. To his surprise, it didn't vanish as his weapons had. It seemed to glow a faint light, repelling the shadow around it. You aren't the only one who's learned how to manipulate the shadow. Closing his eyes, Cain focused on the warmth inside him. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Thoughts of Ravion and Gareth shot into his mind. He couldn't be having this conversation had it not been for them. They were the cell keeping him moving. A bright light erupted from the discarded breastplate, burning the darkness away. Even with his eyes closed, Cain could see its radiance. Wrapping his hands around the warm glow, he opened his eyes, seeing the pulsing greatsword in front of him, the blade made from the purest white light, its hilt and pommel equally brilliant. For the first time since he'd arrived in this place, he felt hope. That's not possible. Leviathan studied the summoned blade. How could such a weapon exist in a place of darkness? He'd spent more time in the shadow than most, yet he'd never seen anything close to this purity. Only the gods were capable of harnessing such raw power. But which one? The answer filled his mind, sending a slither of doubt through him. Dedri. Silently, he called out to the god. I know you're here. Magic like that doesn't just spring up from nowhere. As if answering his call, a booming voice echoed in his head. You've disappointed me, Leviathan. You've abused the powers for too long. What right do you have? What right do you have? Leviathan shouted into the shadow, feeling his anger and fear rise. I have every right. You've crossed the line. You've enslaved this child of Arcane since he was a boy. You've mixed the magics, both mine and hers. And you have the audacity to step into my realm and question my authority? It's time you learned your place, worm. Cain slashed in, watching the beaming light slice through the shattered man's leg. Blood seeped from the wound, soaking into the thick black pants. It seems I've found a weapon that will do the trick. There was a joy in taunting the man that had gone through so much effort to do the same to him. Be on your guard, Dedre. When I'm finished with this fool, I'm coming for you. Lightning fast, Leviathan drew his sword and stabbed in, bending at the waist. The slightly curved blade rocketed toward Cain, aimed at his chest. Twisting his hip, he watched the glowing weapon fly over his head, missing him entirely. Cain abandoned his strike, bringing the lower half of the blade up to deflect the incoming stab. He heard steel ring out as it locked the weapon away from him. He sidestepped, dodging a wide blow. Watching, he counted the time between attacks, seeing if he'd close it. It was more likely a trap designed to draw him in, only to have him too close to block. Counting through his routine, it never closed. It was a long shot, but he had to take it. He just had to be careful. Excuse me. Traps were something this being was all too skilled in, and he didn't intend on being victimized again. Feigning right, the sword outstretched, aimed to stab mid-chest, he rapidly dropped the tip and lunged in. Leviathan saw the decoy. He smiled, seeing him take the bait. Although the blinding light was throwing his perception off. He was too close to shut him off. Unable to defend, a sharp pain stabbed through his stomach. Glancing down, finding the glowing blade buried to the hilt in him. The links of chainmail glowed red, burning into his flesh. He watched the molten metal drip from the sword that may have well been forged by the sun itself. Cain pushed his shoulder into the defeated doppelganger, ripping the sword upward. It split him with ease, tearing the rings apart like a hot knife into butter. He watched, helpless to the damage that was befalling him. Weak, his sword slipped from his hand. It fell into the shadows, disappearing from sight as the others had. I told you you underestimated me. Looking into the dying figure's eyes, Cain ripped the blade free, watching the impostor fall to his knees. Thick onyx blood poured from the gaping chest wound. Cain felt the slightest pleasure at the sight. He had more reason than most to hate the man, yet he felt pity more than anything. Though something inside him told him there was more to this than the dying man had claimed. Those secrets would have to remain lost. He owed vengeance to the people of Dalmora, and gods knew how many others long before his arrival. Steeling himself, he spun around, swinging the blade as hard as he could. It sank deep into his neck, passing through flesh and bone, to explode out the other side with a sickening pop. The force of the blow sent the body toppling over. The head bounced several times, coming to a rest a few feet away. Set in his victory, Cain watched the final fall of his enemy's chest. Feeling a sense of relief wash over him, the sword shrank and disappeared into a foggy gray. He looked around, watching the fog dilute the darkness, as if carried away on a light breeze. The body faded out of sight. A powerful voice echoed around him, leaving a strange comfort in the mist. Well done, my son. Cain turned to see a large wolf on the edge of the evading shadow. The wolf approached, growing larger by the step. It was nearly dire in size and still growing. Stopping a few feet away, it shifted. The gray hair retreated, revealing peach-colored skin. Taking weight on its own rear legs, a man stood and approached the final few steps. He stood several inches taller and had long brown hair pulled into a tail. A dark brown reinforced leather plate covered his chest, and he wore matching bracers over his long-sleeved tunic. He was unarmed, despite the empty sheath resting loosely at his hip. There was a familiar. I hate whenever words don't want to work right. Familiarity. Fucking word. It's been a long day, people, just so you know. Anyways, that word to the old man. But it was one he couldn't place. Kane studied the bright blue glow radiating from him, noting the similar traits he shared with Ravion. In fact, this man looked like an older, stockier version of his friend. Who are you? The man gave a light smile, both comforting and reassuring him. My name is Marquil Santel. I am your father. That's not supposed to sound so Star Wars-like, but, whatever. He gave a shallow bow, reminding him of the way Ravion had at their introduction, and hundreds of times since. He knew it to be true. There was too much similarity between them, though doubts flew through his mind. Hoping his question wouldn't warrant offense, Kane looked deep into the man, searching for the answers beneath the surface. Forgive me, but how am I expected to believe this? I've been in this place a while. I'm familiar with the tricks the Shadow plays. This wouldn't be beyond the realm of possibilities. No forgiveness needed. You've witnessed much, and for that I'm sorry. I'm also afraid that any proof I can offer would come from... I'm also afraid any proof I can offer would come from a form you've no reason to trust. It seems we're at an impasse, one which requires a choice from you. I don't understand. I desire my son's return. Many years ago he was corrupted by a dragon. When the beast entered his body, his mind was tainted. It wiped all memory from him, leaving a blank slate of who he formerly was. Fortunately, he was found by a noble gentleman who instilled in him morals and virtue. Were it not for this man, I fear to think who he may have become. But you've been successful in defeating the beast corruption. But I assure you, it's not dead. When he told you you were one and the same, he was not lying. It was the corruption that created the emptiness, later filled by an old man's virtue. That became the man you are today. Marquil paused, placing his hand on Kane's shoulder. His eyes trailed from the man before him and into the fog-covered floor. It pains me to say this, but the corruption cannot be shed until the memories have returned. Until you relinquish my son's body, Leviathan's corruption will live on. Bringing his piercing brown eyes back to meet the younger man, he continued, You must both fall before you can truly rise. Kane sighed heavily. He was beginning to understand what the man was saying. What happens once the corruption is gone? For you, I'm afraid I don't know the specifics. But my son will reemerge. For Leviathan... For Leviathan, he's in a weakened state currently, both here and in the physical realm. If nothing changes, he will regain his strength and continue his path. If you cast him out, he may rise again one day in the physical realm. But that's a problem for another time. He's currently of no threat to the lands you call home. I don't know much about dragons, having only met a few. But why would such a beast go through the trouble of possessing your son? And moreover, what would he hope to gain from it? Sadly, I'm unable to answer these questions, as I don't fully know. I can tell you that as one of the elder races, there's more potential in you than you realize. Of the 5 elder races, we are each gifted in our own ways. Dragons have the gift of foresight. For all I know, he saw something in your life that drove his actions. Whether he achieved his goals or not is uncertain. Even the clairvoyant have their limits. Marquil paused a moment, giving a gentle smile to the confused yet resilient man. So may I please have my son back? A heavy sigh escaped him. Kane nodded, summoning the focus he'd found earlier. As before, he felt the power form in his hand. It wasn't nearly as strong as it had been. Opening his eyes, he glanced at the summoned dagger, forged of a rolling smoke. Finding reassurance in the man's eyes, he spoke. I suppose it had to happen sooner or later. If you're telling me the truth, everything will be all right. If not, at least I won't be stuck in this place any longer. Flipping the small blade toward him, he plunged it into his chest, feeling a sharp pain erupt like 1,000 needle pricks against his bare skin. A loud pop echoed in his mind, sending doubt throughout his body. Dropping to his knees, he felt cold, his body weakening, shaking uncontrollably. Marquil caught him, keeping kneeling beside the dying form. Holding him as best he could, he stared into the eyes, hoping to bring comfort among the flood of pain and fear. Cain stared into those deep brown eyes, finding concern for his well-being. That was enough to convince him it wasn't a trick. The reassuring smile faded his doubt. It didn't hurt as much as he'd expected. Instead, it was more of a comfortable numb. More of an uncomfortable numb. It started in his fingers and toes, slowly working its way toward his center. He couldn't feel his body. He was little more than a floating, fading head in a sea of fog. His vision was rapidly failing, leaving black blotches here and there. Each thundering heartbeat left another patch. He watched the man disappear, and then himself. Once again he was surrounded in darkness. This time, though, it seemed different. He couldn't see anything, not even his own form. He was but a thought lingering in an endless ocean. A blinding light roused him. Memories flooded his mind. Opening his eyes, his childhood in the grove outside of Winterhaven fell in place. He recalled Maya sweeping him up, giving him a dagger. One by one, his memories took their place, mixed with those of the lost years, and there was so much time he had missed. How was it possible he could have forgotten all of that? The final pieces fell into place. His father's face came to him, and then his mother's. Ravion watched over him, annoyed by his antics. He smiled, recalling he'd only acted out because he wanted to be just like him. Finally, his sister came into view. She was beautiful in her own right, if only he'd been able to find her. Wiping the sorrow of his failure away, he took comfort in her memory. Perhaps one day he would make it right. "I'm sorry for doubting you, Father." Markill extended his hand, pulling the young Dalarai to his feet. "I'm just glad you're yourself again. I wish it could have happened much sooner." Demetrix took his father's hand, gathering his bearings. He glanced at his naked form, unsure how he'd ended up that way. "In this place, my will is law?" Demetrix questioned. Markill chuckled. "To a degree. There are limitations. In the void, but for the most part, yes." Nodding his understanding, Demetrix closed his eyes, extending his arms. The warmth of clothing grasped him, wrapping layers of cloth and leather around his frame. Inspecting the green and brown leather covering his body from shoulder to knee, he smiled his approval. A quiver hung from his side, and two slender swords rested in separate compartments beside his arrows. An elegant bow ran down his back, waiting to be strung. The curved wood was wrapped in a dark brown with green runes running the length, and the wax string had an emerald glaze to it. "I'm happy you were able to find yourself, my son. I wish I could spend more time with you, but I fear I must return to the void. There is much I would have of you, but your life is your own. Ravion has made strides to return our people to their former glory. He is on the right path, and he may need your help." Markiel started to fade. Hurrying his pace, he added what little he could. "The Alfar are spread thin, and many have forgotten the old ways. They'll offer no resistance to the return. The Santel bloodline is but a fraction of our people. We take the aspect of the wolf. With your coming of age, you are to carry the wolf as your brother does. Each of us carries the aspect of another animal. Your brother is the raven, your sister the phoenix, you, my son, are the hawk. Ever watchful and wise. You'll need these tools in the coming years. Use them wisely, and do not forget your people. I also wish you to know your sister bore 2 children, twin girls. Demetrix watched his father fade into nothing, leaving him alone once again. Taking a deep breath, he felt a warmth long since forgotten. The fog slowly drifted away, revealing the council room floor. And that is the end of that particular chapter. We won't be here real long just because my phone is claiming that it wants to die. But we'll talk about a couple things real quick. First and foremost, I wasn't able to record last week because I was in Indiana at TriCon, which was awesome. I wish, for those of you that couldn't make it, I wish you could have been there. It was a hell of a time, lots of fun. Mojo Party was awesome. People were awesome. It's a very comfortable place. If you ever have the opportunity to make it to TriCon, I highly recommend you do it. In other news on that front, I sold out of all of my copies of Exodus there. And when I got home, I had another shipment waiting for me, so that works. I do have a few copies left. But I've got a feeling they're going to disappear pretty quick as well. Any of my books, you can get them on Amazon or paperbacks on Barnes & Noble. Just Google the titles or my name or anything, and you can find them all. Other stuff, I read a book by some other local authors recently called The Misfits Tavern by Matthew and Latasha Lee. I was a little surprised. Being their first book, I expected problems, continuity errors, stuff like that. And it read very smooth, very well. They did a fantastic job on it. I would recommend that you read it. It's kind of like the TV show Cheers, only with magic and fantasy stuff. And you would enjoy it if you like fantasy. You pretty much enjoy it if you like anything. So give their book a chance. You won't regret it. Next book I will be working on pretty soon is it's a little different from my other ones. Still kind of falls into the Elderlands world. Basically, it's going to take place over in... we haven't got there yet in Speculum, but the heroes end up going to another world for a brief period of time. And this next book will take place in that other world, so we'll get into more of that at a later date. After that, I'm planning to write a book to aim for one of the big 5 publishers. Hopefully that'll happen because, I'm tired of being broke all the time. I want money. And then after that, I will be, aside from contract jobs, I'll be getting back into the Elderlands series shortly thereafter with Bloodlines, which does not require the Order of the Trident for you to understand. It will be its own little point in time. Some of the characters from the Order of the Trident, you'll recognize them, but you don't have to read one set to read the next one. So, Bloodlines, you can pick up from there, or if you want to read Order of the Trident, or you'll be good either way. But anyway, I'm gonna get off here. I'm gonna do some work, eat some dinner, and we'll talk to you guys later. Have a good evening. Bye.